Okay, so it's that time in the course that we've moved on to databases now. So this is our first database workshop, and therefore it's quite a high-level overview at the moment. So we're not getting into the nitty-gritty, we're not getting into too many database commands. We're just looking at the different types of databases out there, and then specifically looking at MongoDB, which is what we work with during this course. So, firstly, I just wanted to mention the differences between SQL and NoSQL databases, or you might have heard of SQL. Yeah, some people say SQL, some people say SQL. So, SQL was the main type of database for a long time. SQL deals with very, very structured data. And if you haven't worked with a SQL database before, you can think of it a little bit like an Excel spreadsheet. It's laid out in tables, and you will have columns and rows in your data, and the columns are traditionally known as fields, while the rows just hold the values. So SQL is great because we've got a huge workforce that knows SQL. We haven't got the same amount of people who have worked with NoSQL databases, just because NoSQL is newer, and SQL database has been around a long time, and as I say, it was the go-to type of database for all businesses. There are various different SQL databases. The one that most people have heard of is MySQL, just because it's probably got SQL in the name. So that was used in a lot of stacks. So if you install something like the LAMP stack or the MAMP stack, I think MySQL used to come bundled with that as the database. Whether that's changed, I'm not entirely sure. It's been a while since I've used those stacks. So as I say, SQL's great for structured data, and if you know ahead of time exactly what form your data is going to take, so you can have a very strict schema. You can define what data you want in your database, and you can define what data type it's going to be, what records need to contain what data types, and all stuff like that. NoSQL is a bit more flexible. So as the nature and the amount of data that we store has changed, then a lot of companies found the existing SQL databases not good enough, or let's say not flexible enough. So an alternative to SQL databases is a NoSQL database, which stands for what? Anyone know? It doesn't literally just mean no SQL, it actually stands for something. So the NO is not only SQL. So essentially you can still have structured data inside of a SQL database, but it can also have a more flexible schema. So not only SQL databases. And there are 4 distinct types of NoSQL databases as well. If we're just working with very, very simple data, then we might just want to have a key value NoSQL database. So you can think of this as very similar to a JavaScript object. JavaScript objects are key value pairs, and that's what type of data this database will store, or the structure that it will store. Just key value pairs, and then we can just access the relevant key value pairs when we need. So there's not too much structure to that one, right? It's just a storage of lots of different key value pairs. Moving on, we have a document database. Now this is a bit more structured. So we're sticking our key value pairs, if you like, inside of distinct documents. And those documents would contain related data, and each key value pair would be relevant for that document. So in the case of your CodeFlix app, the document might be an individual movie, and then the key value pairs would be the properties and the values of things about that movie, such as its title, its year, its director, its running length, its rating on IMDb. All of these things could be stored in a single movie document. So the key value pairs would have just stored that data as key value pairs, and you'd have to sort of just grab it out as and when needed. But the document is adding a little bit more structure to it. And this is actually the type of NoSQL database that MongoDB is. MongoDB is a document-based NoSQL database. And then we often end up storing our documents itself in collections or some other grouped container. Yeah, so that a collection might be movies, and then each document represents an individual movie. Yeah. All of the movies don't have to contain the same properties. Hopefully they've all got a title, but some might have the directors listed, others might have the actors listed, some are missing that information, and that doesn't matter too much in a NoSQL database. In SQL databases, it's great if we have as much of this data as possible present for all records, but NoSQL databases can be a bit more flexible. We have the column family, which sometimes people confuse with traditional SQL databases because they're often laid out in rows and columns, but it's a bit different. Yeah, there is no strict schema again, so they do have this column-like structure, and they do still have those key pair values, very similar to JavaScript objects, but as it says there, they're not restricted by a certain schema. A schema is just like the blueprint for your data, yeah, if I haven't made that clear. And then one of the newest additions, which attempted, I guess, to fill the gap of something that SQL databases and particularly relational database management systems are quite good at, is linking all of the different types of data in the tables together in a traditional SQL database. So that can get messy though in traditional SQL databases, so a graph NoSQL database, if you like, is an alternative to that. And it's, as it says there, a completely different way of thinking about the data. It's not necessarily restricted to these one-to-many relationships or many-to-many relationships that you have in traditional databases. It's a lot more free-flowing model. So yeah, that I guess is one of the newest ones. So a lot of these databases, they're still finding exactly what they're good at, and we're still training up in them and getting the talent pool to work with these databases, but it's just useful to know there are quite a few options out there now. And there is no right database always, it just depends on what your data is. So if you're in a startup and you're not quite sure what data you're going to collect further down the road, then NoSQL might be a good option, because it gives you that flexibility to change your schema and to change what type of data you collect over time. If you're working for a bank and you know that the data that you're collecting is very, very structured, it's not going to change, it needs to be highly secure, you need developers that know what they're doing, then you're probably just going to stick with the tried and tested databases. Yeah? So it's not like NoSQL's better, it's just it gives us more options and working with different types of data. Any questions on the really high-level types of databases out there for now, or shall I move on? So I'll give you these documents afterwards. Give you these links. Let's move on then to look specifically at MongoDB. So why MongoDB? Why are we using that? Well, it plays quite nicely with JavaScript because the syntax and the way the data is stored, as I said, is very similar to JavaScript objects. MongoDB actually stores things as BSON, which is a binary form of JSON, if you like. Yeah, JSON is your JavaScript object notation, whereas BSON is a binary format of that. So think of it as just an optimized format of JSON data. So MongoDB, it calls itself the database for modern applications, right? This is obviously their blurb, their promotional material, and then they quote all the big companies that are using it. So look, there are some big names obviously in there that are using NoSQL databases, and specifically Mongo. So I always think if it's good enough for them, it's probably good enough for me to start playing around with and have a look at least. Yeah, so if you go on the site, we'll just talk a little bit about the setup today. So some of you I know had to go at that yesterday, and I'll just show you a few ways that we can connect and create a MongoDB database. Yep, so that's the official site, and there is the official download center as well. And the best way to get started is probably to, well, I think probably the best way to get started actually to go with Mongo Atlas, which we'll come on to in a minute. But if you want to have a testing environment on your own computer as well, then you've got the MongoDB community server, and that comes bundled with a few different tools. Essentially, it comes bundled with a background process, a Mongo daemon or Mongo daemon, however you want to pronounce it, and that is a background process that will enable you to run a Mongo server on your computer. So think of Node as a server that runs JavaScript code, whereas your Mongo daemon is a background process that runs a Mongo server. Yeah, enables you to run Mongo processes on your computer. So that comes bundled with a community server edition. So does a command line tool to let you connect to a Mongo server, all from your own laptop. Yep, so that might be a tool that you want to download if you haven't already. There is, nope, sorry, that's Compass. Yeah, so there's the official documentation here. So that's just docs.mongo.com, and that will tell you how to download the community edition depending on what operating system you're on, right? So you've got all the three major operating systems and their subdivisions. They're listed, so you're not restricted to one sort of OS for Mongo. And of course the instructions are a bit different depending on your operating system, so I'm not going to go into those now, but the documentation's fairly good, and also there's a task on CodeFlix to help guide you as well. Cool. One other option, and this is probably the option that is the most user-friendly, I would say, to begin with, because there's a few extra setup steps that you have to do to get these servers running on your own computer. But how about you just let Mongo take care of that let Mongo take care of that for you, yeah? So they've got a cloud service called MongoDB Atlas, and where is the actual official one? That's the one. So it's a database as a service in the cloud, and you can try it for free. There's lots of free options. I'm just wondering whether it will let me try it for free without logging in. I can show you what you're going to get to begin with. Yeah, so this is sort of the welcome page. If you click get started free, okay, you're going to need to give a few basic details. So let's just assume you've done that, and then it will ask you to create a cluster. And so I'll just talk a little bit now about how Mongo databases are structured. So a Mongo database cluster traditionally looks something like that, or at least for the free cluster, that's about as complicated as it will get. If you have a paid service, you're going to have multiple clusters, and they'll be arranged perhaps in more complex ways. But essentially you have a primary which stores all of your database information. So all of your collections, all of your documents are on there. And as long as everything's working as it should, then the primary database is the only one that you will need to connect to. However, if for some reason there's an incident on the server and there's a problem in some way, then Mongo might halt that service or halt your connection to it and redirect you to this secondary backup. So this is an exact replica of your primary Mongo database here. So you're essentially shutting down your connection to the primary and connecting to this secondary instead, which becomes the new primary. Yeah, that is now your connection to your database service. And as that's got a copy of all your data, then there's no cause for alarm. That gives them time to fix the primary or resolve any server issues they might have had. So it's just a redundancy built in and enables you to not lose your service or not lose your database connection, right? Think of the Arbiter as just another secondary for now, yeah?
So are they always stored in separate
Yeah, of course, they're going to be stored in separate servers, right? So, yeah, this is not like 3 things on the same server, and then if there's a server problem, then there's an issue. No, so these databases are going to be stored completely separate servers, maybe roughly in the same location, right? So if it was hit by a bomb or something, then they might all go down. The actual physical location, if that was hit, then that could be a problem. Or maybe there's one also stored somewhere else in a different physical location as well. I'm not too sure. Just think of it for now, yeah, as another secondary, right? So if the secondary did go down, you've still got this third sort of complete copy, yeah? Okay. And then each cluster, so that was a cluster that we just looked at, that triangle formation. So each cluster in Mongo contains a database or multiple databases. Each database contains multiple collections, and each collection contains one or more documents. So I drew this out for Johnny yesterday, right? So I like my diagram better, but this was one that I could find quickly and easily this morning without having to draw a digital copy of my diagram. But yeah, we discussed what a document was, essentially just a collection of JavaScript objects or a collection of BSON objects in the case of MongoDB, but they're very similar to just JavaScript objects, yeah? All right. BSON, yeah, B-S-O-N. So it's a binary, B for Bertie, B for Bravo, yeah. So it's a binary form of JSON, really, yeah? So it's a bit more optimized and enables a couple of additional formats that are not supported by JSON. Yeah, so Mongo Atlas, what is it? Well, it's an instance in the cloud of one of these clusters. It lets you create a cluster in the cloud, hosted not on your computer or your servers, but on Mongo servers. And they've got a bit of a monopoly on this at the moment, which is why we had problems a little while back with the migration of the database, yeah? So MLab has stopped its service and everyone's migrating to Mongo Atlas instead. So there might be other instances that allow you to host a MongoDB database, but this is certainly the one that everyone's being pushed towards, right? This is how they make their money after developing their software. So I'm just going to sign in here. In fact, I'm already signed in. So yeah, you would sign in. You'd get eventually some icon that looked like that. And that would let you choose what provider you want to go with. Amazon, Google, or Microsoft. Yeah, the big 3 are supported. I know it's a bit blurry, sorry. And then lets you choose your location. So in general, you're just going to choose a location that is as close to possible as where most of your customers are. Yeah, so that just reduces a little bit of the network time that we're going to have to wait to retrieve our database information. And previously there were only 3 tiers available in very select locations or just a few locations around the world, but the 3 tiers are now available in lots more locations. Okay. So once you finally get into Mongo Atlas and you've got signed up, it will prompt you to create a cluster, or at any time you can just build a new cluster, or you can create a new project first. So most of these things are just fairly self-explanatory, right? Once you've walked through them a few times, then you'll be totally comfortable with it. So we could create a new project, so I'll just do a workshop demo for now, not a problem. You always need to create one user to begin with, and this should be the project owner. I think it will let me just go for the email address for now. Let's see what it lets me. Cool, and then you can build one of these clusters so that we can create some databases. Be careful here, because only one of these is free, yeah? So 8 cents an hour, 13 cents an hour for these single or multi-region clusters, or you've got a starter cluster. So if you're just testing out Mongo, please make sure you select the leftmost one and go for a free one. But if you want more features, then of course they offer paid plans as well. This is the screen I was talking about earlier. Lets you choose your region. So probably Ireland's the closest to us here in London. So it's alright, I thought it was a ghost just pulling the power cables. So you've got some less options, I guess, if you go with not Amazon in this case. Amazon's the most supported. So we can still get Ireland with Microsoft, so I could do that perhaps. Make sure you've selected the M0 sandbox if you want the free plan. These other ones, as you can see, start at a cost, so make sure M0 is ticked. If you want a backup, you've got to pay for that as well, so just go for no backup for now. And give your cluster a name, so you haven't just got lots of anonymous clusters. So this could be the same name as your project, or it could be different. Yeah, I'll just call it Workshop Demo 1.
So if it's no backup, does that mean it's just the primary?
No, it means you've still got your full cluster, but it means that you haven't saved your data. So it's not the database itself, but the actual data within the database is not backed up.
So what's backing up?
Yeah, so some people have very precious data, right? And
Yeah.
if that situation arises that I said, where a physical location is taken out for whatever reason, or infected, then I guess you've got the backup that you can restore.
Yeah. I guess a lot of companies that have like self-required information end up having like in-house servers.
They do, but more and more people are just putting that in the cloud as well. Now that people trust the cloud, they're probably thinking that actually it might be more secure with a cloud provider rather than on my own site, because I don't have to hire all the security personnel, I don't have to vet them, I don't have to train them.
Just like outsourcing.
So it's outsourcing all the security costs as well, which can be pretty costly. Yeah, so I think even quite sensitive data now is moving to the cloud. But yeah, not all data, because I used to work for medical research and I had to physically go to the hospitals. That data isn't anywhere on the web. It's not retrievable on the web. You just have to physically go and connect to those computers and get the data. So go on site. Exactly, yeah, clinical trials and stuff like that.
What are you doing?
I wasn't doing the clinical trials. I was analysing the data from the clinical trials. Yeah? But there's that option as well to try and keep things safe, yeah? Yeah, click the Create Cluster button when you're done, when you've named it. And it will take a little while. It's quicker than it used to be. It used to say 5 to 8 minutes, I think. Now it's 1 to 3 minutes. They've obviously optimised in some way. Why that is going on, I can just switch to another project. So you're going to have a CodeFlix one, aren't you, somewhere? Yeah, and one of the first things you need to do, or you might want to do at a later point, is create some users for your database so that people can actually connect to your database. You can do that under Security and Database Access. And then look, it's again fairly self-explanatory, just add new user. It asks you for either a username and password or some sort of certificate. So depending on how secure you want to be, you can investigate those options. And then you can set the permissions as well for that user. Are they an admin user? Can they do everything? Can they just read and write to the databases without creating any new users themselves and things like that? Do they just have read-only access? Or you can select from, you can define, yeah, I think you can add some custom roles that are highly defined as well, but maybe you have to do that a different way. Well, it looks like you have to do that a different way. Cool.
When you say users, you mean like other people?
Other people who can...
Or do you mean like you have a database of customers and then the users?
No, I mean users, people who manage the database in some way, yeah? So you don't have to add a user for every single person who might use your database via your website, because that would just be ridiculous. So you just, by users I mean people who are going to manage or work with the database in some way. So going back to the medical research example, if you like, then, so you're going to have a database administrator who controls the database and the database, the data in it, and they can put more data in there, but they don't do any research. And then the researcher just needs read access to the database. Yeah, they're not going to maintain that database. They might not know how to do that, but they know how to analyze data when it comes out of the database. So there's lots of different use cases you can have and lots of different types of users that you can use. Yeah, so when that has booted up, it's probably done by now. If I go just back to the workshop demo. Cool, so you'll be met with that sort of screen. And you can do a few basic things via Atlas itself. You can either load a sample data set or you can add your own data. See if it'll let me add the sample data set. It looks like it will. So let's load that in. At least we've got some data to play with there. And it says we've got CRUD functionality right here in the cloud via Atlas, or there are some other options to work with our database. So we'll let that load in, and I'll talk about a few different ways that you can work with your database. So we spoke about the shell earlier and the Mongo server. So that is essentially just going to be a command line tool. And once you've successfully installed that, you can just use any terminal to access your Mongo database. Firstly, you need to boot up a server or run a server on your machine. The commands again vary slightly depending on your operating system. For me, I need the sudo command, and then I just type Mongo followed by a D. D, I think in this case stands for the daemon or the daemon that I mentioned earlier, which is just a background process. So MongoD. That will ask you for your password of your laptop, and then it does all this sort of stuff. So that starts up the server, and at the bottom it should say, can you see that or not? It should say waiting for connections on port 27017. So that's the default for MongoDB. Just like the default for our node in Create React App was port 3000. Yeah, this is the default port now for MongoDB connections. Once that has loaded up, that means that you can just, sorry, let me just clear this down. That means that you can now connect to a Mongo database using the command line. And the command for that to connect locally is just the word Mongo. And that boots up the Mongo shell. And if we go down the bottom, if there's a prompt, that means we have been successful. So the way I've done it now, it's just looking for any databases that I have created on my computer. It's not trying to connect to the cloud. I'm going to show you how to do that in a second when we've loaded our sample data, and hopefully it will work. So we can just see if we've got any databases already on our machine, and there's a simple command for that, and it's called show dbs, so show databases. If you hit run, you should see that locally, usually you're going to have an admin, a config, and a local with any cluster that you create. So effectively I've got a cluster on my machine as well, think of it, but it's not, it hasn't got a primary or secondary and all this stuff, it's just my machine. Yeah. And then I've got various different databases. So the only ones that I have created are the CodeFlix and the Coderi development database. As you can see, most of them are quite small, but the Coderi development database, this was again quite a long time ago that I used this database. It's probably quite a bit larger now as Coderi's grown, but this is just a copy of our production database that we can test for development purposes. So how do I actually use one of those databases? Well, again, it's pretty easy. I just type use and then the name of the database. And that will switch me to the database that I want to use. So I've moved down one level now, right? We're not at just the cluster level, we've moved down to the database level. What were the two levels below the database level? There are definitely documents, because MongoDB is a document-based database, and then we store our documents in something called a collection. Yeah, so a collection is a group of documents. So in other words, I'm in the database. Let's see if there's any collections next. I think we can do something similar. Let's see, can we do codeflix.show collections? It's probably a method. Nope, that's not right. Just collections on its own. No. Okay. Yeah, okay. So, I'm not sure whether I needed to move into the collections area or whether I could just type show collections the same way as I typed show databases. So let's just move up again. So let's just say use codeflix, and then if I type show collections, yeah, cool. Okay, so it's just the same format, right? I can just type show collections and that will tell me if I've got any collections inside of there. And my collection is called shows, which in other words is TV shows or movies, right, in your case. So then, once you're in that collection, you can do various things with that collection. The most obvious one is just to display all of the shows. So you type DB, which now is aliased, is an alias for the codeflix database, and then look at how I'm using these methods. I'm just chaining them on like I would with JavaScript, yeah? So it's almost similar to JavaScript object notation, yeah, the dot syntax for JavaScript object notation. So db.shows, and I can do .find, and you can pass an object into find so that it returns the documents that match whatever we pass inside of this object. So this is equivalent to your select queries in SQL databases if you've used a SQL database. Or you just pass in an empty object and that will essentially select all of the shows. What happened there? Oh, yep, so that has returned all the shows, but it doesn't look very nice. That's not very readable. Yeah? It has given me my ID, my title, synopsis, things like that. So that data is in there. However, I can chain on another method called pretty, and that should make it a bit more readable. There you go. So that looks a bit more like JSON. Huh? So that's a pretty version of our database objects there. It's very similar to a JSON formatter that you might have built into the browser. It's not that pretty, it's still black and white, but it's better than it was, right? It's a bit more readable, got some indentation and stuff like that. Cool. I want to delve more into the commands this afternoon, but I just want to show you at least that that's how you would look at the different databases on your own machine. And then of course you can also use the shell to connect to things in the cloud as well. Let's exit that. Just Control-C again to exit. That stops any process in the terminal, not just a server. Where were we? So we tried to load some sample data. Okay, so we've got sample Airbnb listings and reviews apparently. That is the data that we have been given as a sample. So, you know when I did database.shows.find and then I put an object in there, then you can do the same thing via Mongo Atlas, and you can just put it directly into this filter up here. So let's have a look. What sort of data have we got here? We've got house rules, room type. I think room type is going to be a good one, yeah? So what I can do is I can copy that data, and we'll look just for private rooms in our sample Airbnb listings. So I'm just going to paste my query. So all I have to do in Atlas is that I just pass in an object, and that will return all of the listings that match room type with the value of private room. In the shell, I would have had to done db dot, what is the name of my collection, listings and reviews, so something like listings and reviews dot find, and then pass in my object to my find method. Yeah, so that would be the equivalent in the shell, but via Atlas we just pass in the object into our GUI, so it's made a bit easier for us, and then click the find button and see what listings we get back. So that will just churn away, select all the databases, and now if I have a look at these listings, room type private room, go down to the next one, it's a private room, yeah. So you can see that now we've filtered out all the listings that are not a private room. That one's got a real bed, which I'm quite impressed with. I don't know what else you can have apart from a bed type real bed, but I'm glad that that one has got a real bed, not imaginary one. I don't like imaginary beds when I go to Airbnb. Cool. Or you could search by cancellation policy, whatever you wanted, yeah? So you can just filter out, and then that could churn the results back to your app, and you can display them based on what the user queried. So Airbnb probably does work something like this, yeah? They've got all of their rooms and listings stored on a database, and when you apply your filters and your dates, it will query the database for that information and show you only the relevant listings. So yeah, you can use Atlas in the cloud to do some basic queries. Looks like you can create databases easy enough. I'm sure you can do a lot more. I tend not to use Atlas too much. I tend to either use the shell, which I just showed you, or they've got actual bit of native software that you can download as well, and that is called Compass. So you can download and install Compass, and think of that as just a graphical user interface for connecting and managing MongoDB databases that you install on your actual machine. So you don't connect to the internet to use it, you install it on your actual machine. The way we used to use Microsoft Word and all programs like that, right? We installed a copy in our machines rather than using Office 365 in the cloud. Yep, so you can download that, and then that brings you up with this sort of interface and allows you to connect to either a local database or a database in the cloud. Now, there's quite a lot of options there, so you probably think, oh god, what do these all mean? Do I have to fill out these one by one? And pretty much, no, you don't have to fill them out one by one. You use Atlas for this initial connection, and if you ever are just a bit lost with all these menus, the easiest way I think is just to go up into the projects, click on the project that you were just on, and it brings back this sort of landing screen, and I can usually find my way around from there. I want to connect to this database now. I want to find out how I can connect to this database rather than having to log on to the web each time. Maybe I want to connect an application to it. Maybe I want to connect via Compass. So once you've got your user, it says you can't connect yet. Yeah, good point. So this is a new project, and so that you don't just allow anyone to connect to your database or from any location, so even if they've got your username and password, you might want to have that extra layer of security and say, hang on, you can only connect if I know what your IP address is, or I know what computer or location you're connecting from. So we can stop the Russians sabotaging the next Kadiri team challenge, yeah? I'm not saying they did. But. So you can either give an actual IP address, which is probably defaulted to this one here, or just for development purposes, please don't do this in production, you can do 0.0.0.0/0, and that will allow access from anywhere. Yeah? You can add that, so that's whitelisted the IP, and then we can just create a user with some credentials. So I don't know what that password is, so I'm going to put in a new one and create the user from that. I think it changed the password, whatever it was. I don't want to reveal it just in case it's what I use for other things. It shouldn't be, right? But I'll leave it as it was. Okay, and then, anyway, once you've set a username and password and you've added a whitelist IP, you're given 3 different connection methods. So you can connect via the Mongo shell. That was what we did earlier in the terminal. You can connect via your application, and that will give you some other options. What application are you using? Select your language, right? You're using C, you're using Java, you're using JavaScript Node. Lots of options, yeah? And then what version are you using of that? Cool, well, I think we're on version 4 already of MongoDB, so maybe this is the driver version rather than the actual database version. Anyway, just go for the latest one unless you have a good reason not to, and it will give you this connection string. So this is how we are going to connect to our MongoDB instance. If you copy that, we can come and paste that over in Compass. Look, it actually detects it for us. String is detected. Say yes. The only thing that's missing is the password. So you would just need to put your password in there. Let's see whether it did let me assign a new password. Give it a name so that you can easily retrieve it later. Click create favorite. And now you can come across and just click that anytime you want to connect to the workshop demo. It'll be saved there in your favorites. You'll have to enter your password again unless you've used a different connection string. Click connect, and yeah, it says authentication failed, so probably it didn't let me change the password, so I'm going to try a different one. Still failed. Okay, I don't know what the password is, which is great, but if you did know your password, then you would be able to connect via that as well. I will check for this afternoon's workshop, and I'll show you it up and running in Compass as well. See whether I've got the form demo one, whether I just put demo in for that. I might have done. No, okay. I'll definitely just double check that I can connect via Compass for you this afternoon. But at least that gives you another option to connect. Do I want to show anything else this morning? Go on. Oh, you just stretching, Joshua, yeah? No worries. Yeah, you can also do some pretty cool things once you get into Compass, and you can visualize your data. You might be able to do it via Atlas as well. But say you've got geospatial data, so data that is lots of points on a map, then you can visualize that and it will plot all the different points on the map for you as well, which can be pretty useful just from coordinate pairs, latitude and longitude, and it will plot them all for you. Anything else I want to say, or any questions you guys have? And we will do the nitty gritty of the commands, and we'll do some CRUD commands this afternoon. So create, read, update, delete to the database. Any questions on the installation? Did anyone have any trouble installing it? No, it's fairly straightforward. Clarissa, did you have any things that you wanted to share that other people might run into, the similar problems?
No, I found that quite straightforward. It was doing it by the terminal.
Doing it via the terminal, yeah.
That's where I had.
So if you go to the CodeFlix task, that's on GitHub, isn't it? So we got.
I mean, if we use the Atlas, then we don't have to use the terminal.
You don't have to, no. So some people just like to have a local server so that they can test the database before using it in the cloud. So yeah, you definitely don't have to.
So when you do your tabs in 26, you can just do that via Atlas.
Yeah. You can do it via Atlas, but the problem is if you're running npm start or npm start all in your Node application and you've got a database connected to that app, then without installing the community server on your machine, the database isn't going to work. Yeah, it's not. Well, it's not going to work. Hold on, it will work.
I managed to, okay, I'll show you afterwards.
Will it work? Will it? I don't. I'm not sure. I don't think it will.
Can't you just do it now?
So anyway, you can go to task 26. And I think one of the trickiest bits is probably once you've downloaded it, then actually having to change the path, so changing the environment variables on either Windows or Mac OS. I think probably that's the step that trips most people up. Again, depending on your operating system, there'll be different instructions. And after that, it's just doing the similar commands that we did, right? MongoD and then Mongo, and that should get it up and running. So as long as you download it okay from the official source, then this is the only tricky bit, I think. So I think most of you have got Macs in here, so if I just looked at that option. So there's a few things obviously you need to do there, but if you go through it step by step, you should be okay. If not, give me a shout and I'll see what I can do. And also you've got the official docs as well, which will give you a bit more of a detailed breakdown probably than that little article there. Cool. If you want any more information about Mongo itself, there's a couple of good sources that I'd recommend, or you want to learn more about Mongo for use in the future, then they have their own free university, or they call it a university, but it's just an online set of courses, video-based courses, so lots of opportunities to learn more about Mongo there. That is just at university.mongodb.com. I'll share these links again. The courses only run, they're not continuous, so they have starting dates and end dates and stuff. So this one's already started, 3rd of December, and I guess the next iteration you can find quite easily just by going to all courses and selecting what you want. So for developers, it's probably the path that you're most interested in, unless you want to be a database admin, and then that will teach you more about the architecture as opposed to developers, how you connect it into an actual application. Yeah, so they've got some really good courses, or you just want tutorials point, again, has got just quite a nice breakdown of all the basics there. And what other one? All the official docs. I think that's all I'm going to recommend, yeah. So you've got Mongo University, the official documentation, or tutorials point just breaks down some of the most basic steps for you as well. So I'll share those 3 links, and that's all I want to say, unless anyone's got any other questions. Nope.
Good stuff.
Good stuff, thank you.